Hello and welcome to the latest edition of The Exchange, brought to you by the New York Stock Exchange. As a reminder, today's interview is for informational purposes only. The NYSE does not recommend investments or investment strategies. We're live on the floor of the exchange with my friend Bill Davis. He is the founder and portfolio manager at STNC Capital. Bill, thank you so much for joining.
Doug, thanks for having me in.
I want to talk about your ETF. Easy to remember, STNC Capital, ticker symbol STNC.
That's it.
Comes out right off the tongue, STNC. How does STNC fit into the overall ESG landscape?
So I think we play an increasingly important role in the landscape. For one thing, we are a large cap blend strategy or a core strategy, which in the ESG space is actually pretty unique. Most ESG in the US is very top heavy, tends to mine the top 20% of the S&P 500, which is, as you know, pretty concentrated in mega cap tech and comm services. We, on the other hand, tend to really kind of mine most of the rest of the S&P 500. And that's important both because we're not overly concentrated in a couple of sectors and subsectors, but more importantly, for ESG investors, most of them are actually concerned about climate risk. And if you only invest in companies that don't really have a decarbonization problem to begin with, you're not really solving the problem. And we're able to invest across as much of the economy as possible. And so I think that brings another benefit.
All right, here, tough questions only in this interview. 2022 was not a great year for the overall markets, heavily volatile. You're on the hot seat. How did STNC do? How was the performance?
I thought this was going to be a tough question. No, actually, we did very well. We actually outperformed the S&P 500 by
Hold on, say it again. Did you say outperform?
We outperformed the S&P 500 by right around 500 basis points. And I would also say, although it wasn't a good year in the S&P 500, in the ESG space, it was an even worse year for the reasons I mentioned earlier because of the concentration in mega cap, which obviously underperformed even the S&P 500 for the year. So also worth pointing out that STNC is now known as the Hennessy Stance ESG Large Cap Fund.
Okay, so new year, new name. Look into the future for us. What does the ESG landscape look like if we look into the future?
Yeah, so good question. I actually think it's going to be a bit of a tough ride for the ESG space. I mean, there is sort of the macro thing going on, which is there's a lot of backlash against ESG. A lot of it's funded by the oil and gas industry and special interest groups. So the industry itself has to pay attention to it, but the momentum is not slowing down. And then secondly, I think it's an opportunity for a lot of ESG managers to really rethink their commitment to the growth end of the spectrum and whether or not that's a good place to be, in the upcoming business cycle. So I think for us, we're going to continue to do what we do, which is to operate a large blend fund that offers significant downside risk protection.
Now again, ticker symbol STNC, easy to remember. If you want to learn more about this ETF, go to etfcentral.com. That's the industry's website for all things ETFs. Go into the ETF screener, type in STNC, you can learn everything about Bill and his team as well as his ETF. Again, etfcentral.com. That is a wrap on today's edition of The Exchange, all brought to you by the New York Stock Exchange, the home of ETFs.